Hello, World History 1. Hello, World History 1 students. This is Mr. Everton, and this is our second video in our Greece Part 2 unit. Last time we talked about Pericles, the Athenian politician who gets credit for expanding Athenian democracy to create what is in some ways the most democratic form of government that's ever existed, even though only 12% of the population can vote. He rebuilt Athens, including the Parthenon, the most famous example of Greek architecture, and generally established an Athenian Golden Age, a time period where there was great cultural advances in a variety of fields. We're going to talk about three of those fields today: philosophy, math, and science. So please turn to page 5.7 of your notes, and we're going to try to answer this question: how did the Greeks try to understand the world? One way they tried to understand the world was through philosophy. Philosophy, in many ways, covers some of the same ground as religion. It's an attempt to understand some of the hardest questions about life, but some of the most meaningful questions about life, like what will make people happy? What is it possible for us to know? What is the point of being alive in the first place? Religion tries to answer these questions by turning to gods and goddesses, or God, and Greek philosophy tries to answer these questions based in human logic and human reason. So it's like a secular way of approaching the same subject matter. It's a search for wisdom and truth and an attempt to live a better life. Now, the most famous Greek philosopher was Socrates, you see pictured here. And Socrates had a particular, the Socratic method is named after him. The Socratic method is the way that Socrates would teach people through questioning, and he would question everything. And he would lead people through his questions to a better understanding of things that they thought they already believed in. For example, if somebody said that they were doing something because it was just, he would say, well, why is it just? And he would ask them, why are you doing this? And they would say, because the gods would want me to. And he said, how do you know that the gods want you to? And he would question everything, and through his questions lead people to a deeper understanding. However, because he was questioning things like democracy, he got a lot of people angry with him, and he ended up being found guilty of corrupting the youth of Athens and was sentenced to die. And here you can see a painting of Socrates taking hemlock, which is a deadly poison, as his followers beg him not to, but he is upholding the law and abiding by the sentence as it was carried out. Socrates had a student named Plato, and actually most of what we know about Socrates comes from Plato writing about Socrates. Plato was a huge critic of democracy. He thought democracy was a terrible form of government, which makes sense because a democratic government executed his teacher Socrates. Plato said that the reason why democracy wasn't that great was because most people aren't smart enough to be entrusted with making important decisions, that giving over important decisions to the people is asking morons basically to do things that are above their pay grade. He said that Athens and other governments should be ruled by philosophers, that philosophers were the only people who knew enough and were learned enough to make good decisions. Here you can see an illustration of a scene from Plato's Republic, and you can see the left, you can see the philosophers on one side of the wall having meaningful conversation, and on the right you can see a large group of Athenian citizens huddled together behind a wall, being distracted by shadows that are playing on the wall in front of them. Now, Plato's student was named Aristotle. So Socrates taught Plato, Plato taught Aristotle, and these are the three Greek philosophers you need to know. And Aristotle, Plato was more concerned with how can we create the best possible form of government. Aristotle was more interested in using logic and reason to understand the world the way it was. And he believed that you could use logic and observation together to come to an understanding of all kinds of things: art, politics, nature. And he used logic and reason. Here's an example of his reasoning. If you have two true statements that are related, you can come to a third one through logic. So if Socrates is human, if that's a true statement, and then all humans are mortal, that's a true statement, and they share the word human. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. So by using reason and logic, you can take two true statements and come to a third correct statement, and this is called a syllogism. Okay. So now we're going to move into a discussion of Greek mathematics and science. First, we're going to talk about math, which for the Greeks mostly means geometry. And Euclid is probably the most important Greek mathematician, and he gets credited with being the father of geometry. Now, the Greeks didn't invent geometry. The Egyptians and Mesopotamians had been practicing geometry for a long time. But Euclid gets credit with distilling all of geometry into 5 postulates, or 5 statements that he used to explain all of geometry. You've probably, if you've taken a geometry class, you've heard some of these before, like all right angles are equal to each other, or any 2 points can be connected with a line segment. If you continue the line segment, then you'll end up with a straight line. So using 5 expressions like those, Euclid was able to explain all of geometry, and he expanded on those postulates in his book, The Elements, which became the essential text of geometry all the way up to the 20th century. Another important Greek mathematician was Pythagoras, and Pythagoras is most known for the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And so if you know helps you to know the 3 sides of the length of 3 sides of a triangle. So if you know 2 sides of a triangle, you can use the Pythagorean theorem to calculate the remaining side. In science, Archimedes was an important Greek scientist, an engineer really, who used Greek understanding of the natural world and physics, and applied those ideas to solve practical problems. For example, he invented, in many ways, the compound pulley, where you can use a pulley, a rope, and a pulley to lift a weight. But if you include multiple pulleys on the, if you use multiple pulleys, you can lift even more weight. He invented the Archimedes screw, which you see pictured here. It can be used to drain water from a ship's hull. If the ship is leaking water, you can use the Archimedes screw to remove the water. And according to legend, he also invented a weapon that could, basically a lens that could focus the sun's rays and could be used to destroy enemy ships that were trying to attack his city-state, his home city-state of Syracuse. And then finally, another Greek scientist gives his name to the Hippocratic Oath, which here you can see some med students taking the Hippocratic Oath. The Hippocratic Oath is a statement of the ideals of the medical profession, and it gets its name from Hippocrates, the father of medicine. And Hippocrates believed in a lot of, frankly, by modern standards, absurd things, but he made a great advance in the history of medicine in that he recognized that diseases have a scientific cause, and that you could, through testing and observation, you could come to an understanding of what was causing a disease, and in that way try to cure that disease. So that's why Hippocrates gives his name to that important oath, and that's why he's such a big deal in the history of medicine. So to summarize, Greek philosophers such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, they're not the only ones, but they're the most famous, used reason and logic to question the world and pursue wisdom. Greek mathematicians like Euclid and Pythagoras made great advances in geometry, and Greek scientists like Archimedes and Hippocrates applied scientific knowledge in order to solve practical problems like how do you defend your city, or how do you cure an illness. Thanks for watching. Next time, we will talk about Greek theater and poetry.